Hi everyone, in this video I'd like to provide you with a good overview of the Charlotte-Danielson framework as it can be applied in your student teaching experiences. You can use the Danielson framework as part of informing your reflections that are turned in every week as part of your journals. You will also be turning in weekly lesson plans, and the Danielson framework, as you will see, has a lot to say about lesson planning. Your cooperating teacher will be doing weekly observations about your progress as a student teacher. The format can vary, but I have provided a formal observation format for the cooperating teacher to use, and that format is also based upon the Danielson framework. Remember that your lesson plans are due every week. As your university supervisor as well as program coordinator, I will be conducting 6 formal observations. These can be either in person or sometimes by Zoom. Your midterm as well as final observations and evaluations will be based upon the Danielson framework that we're about to go over. And of course, your final evaluations will also be driven by the Danielson framework. The final conference with you that I will conduct will be driven by the Danielson framework as well. Now, I cannot stress enough the importance of EdTPA. This is required for you to pass certification. Hopefully you've already enrolled in 485. If you haven't, make sure you do. 485 is basically a prep course for the EdTPA. I cannot stress enough that I have a fair amount of flexibility in making sure that you're okay when it comes to the observations. Your cooperating teacher has a fair amount of flexibility, but when it comes to the EdTPA, that is not a school assessment. And so you need to make sure that you are preparing for the EdTPA. The Danielson framework and the evaluations we're giving you based upon the Danielson framework are meant to go hand in hand with preparation for the EdTPA. Charlotte Danielson designed this framework around EdTPA and similar tests. You can see that there are overall 4 strands to the Danielson framework: planning and preparation, the managing of your classroom environment, the actual instruction that you give, and your professional responsibilities, including being a reflective practitioner. There are some common themes that emerge when we look at the Danielson framework as well as EdTPA. One would be equity. Equity includes making sure that you're meeting the needs of all students and that you're fair with your students. Cultural competence is your communication and your instruction adjusting well to the cultural backgrounds of your students. Do you have high expectations of learning for all of your students regardless of their backgrounds? Is your instruction developmentally appropriate? Are you accommodating the needs of individual students, including those students who may have different needs than other students based upon linguistic diversity or special needs? Are you effectively integrating technology? And are you integrating the type of instruction in which you encourage students to take responsibility for their learning? First, let's talk about domain 1, the planning of instruction. This is the lesson planning part. When I give you evaluations, and I cannot speak for your cooperating teacher, but I'm just simply speaking for myself here, I will evaluate you based upon, are you ineffective or are you developing in each of these domains? Now, working teachers are evaluated on more than that. In fact, if they're ineffective, then they're at risk of losing a job. And if you're just simply showing developing at the developmental level on a rubric, then that kind of spells trouble. It means that, okay, here's where we need to put a plan for you to improve. Working teachers really should be at levels that are evaluated at accomplished or excellent. That said, you are a student teacher. You're not actually a working classroom teacher yet. You are expected to be learning. I think that it is fair to you and, frankly, honest with you if I evaluate you at the developmental level at your highest, even if I'm very impressed with the lesson that you give and with your overall evaluations. The highest mark that I'm going to give you on my evaluations is at the developmental level. I'll make note, of course, of where you show signs of being accomplished and show signs of being excellent, and I'll make note of where something is outstanding. Obviously, I'm not going to say that you can't do anything well, but as a student teacher, you are at the developmental stage. And I think it's important to recognize that. So I'm going to give you examples in each of these domains for Danielson's framework. I'm going to give you examples of what would be ineffective teaching as well as what would be at the developmental level of teaching. And then I'll give you an example of excellence. Now, I'm hoping that I do see signs of excellence in you in this semester. But if the highest that you're demonstrating is at the developmental level, I'm okay with that. You're a student teacher. Frankly, you are supposed to be at the developmental level at this stage of your career. And then as you progress toward the first, second, and especially third year of your career as a student teacher, hopefully by then everything is showing at the accomplished level and eventually toward the exemplary and excellent level on rubrics that you'll work with that are based upon the Danielson framework. An example of ineffective demonstration of content and pedagogical knowledge would be that if you're exhibiting a lot of content errors, or if you're not correcting content errors that are made by students. By content errors, I mean knowledge in the English language arts, knowledge of literature, knowledge of literary periods, knowledge of trends, knowledge of how to analyze a piece of literature, or basic grammar and syntax and the conventions of language. If you are showing weak knowledge in that and you're making errors, that's ineffective instruction in this area. And also if you are not connecting your lessons with content knowledge. Other examples of ineffective instruction in this area would be inappropriate instructional strategies, or if you're not considering prior knowledge that the students really should have in order to understand lesson. For example, in English language arts, if you're having students repeatedly copy dictionary definitions, which can be very difficult and problematic for students, especially English language learners, because as you know, sometimes a dictionary can give more than one possible definition for a word, and students can struggle to understand which definition of a word fits in what context. And also, students learn words more effectively if they're using words in context in various ways, reading, writing, communication, verbally, or listening, or creating visual representations or making sense out of visual representations. This diverse way of making sense of words is much more effective in terms of teaching vocabulary in ways that are explicit and direct, as opposed to just simply copying out of the dictionary. By contrast, what I'm hoping to see out of you is the developmental level in all of these areas of Danielson. Now, like I've been saying, if you are a working classroom teacher, you would work with rubrics and evaluation sheets that go beyond the developmental level. They go into accomplished and exemplary, for example. I'm not expecting you to be accomplished and exemplary as a student teacher. I am hoping that you show enough growth that I can rate you at least at the developmental level. So hopefully you are showing a familiarity with key concepts in the English language arts, the type of concepts that frankly you should have known in order to have passed the Praxis 2, for example, which you've already passed by virtue of being in this course. If you are making sure that you are taking care of the prerequisites that students should know about in order to understand the content, and you're taking prerequisite prior knowledge in mind as you're making plans. But on the other hand, you may still struggle in terms of your wide range of instructional strategies that you're making use out of. Because remember, at the developmental level, you're still growing. You may, at the developmental level, have good, solid core knowledge in the discipline, but you may not have the depth of conceptual knowledge of some disciplinary concepts related to, let's say, literary analysis that I might hope you would have as you further grow in your career and maybe get advanced degrees in English language arts, hypothetically. And you may not have the type of in-depth instructional strategy use that I would hope you would gain over time as a veteran teacher. Teachers who are excellent in this area have extensive knowledge of the content that they're teaching, as well as extensive knowledge of the wide range of instructional strategies they can use, and they use these strategies appropriately and effectively. But it takes time to develop that level of skill. I'm not expecting that in you this semester. Teachers who are excellent in this area also are able to take that knowledge of content knowledge as well as instructional knowledge and make connections with what they know about cognitive science, neuroscience, and how students develop. And they use this to inform their instruction. Again, it takes time to develop that level of skill. The anticipation of possible misconceptions and misunderstandings that students might have based upon possible lack of background knowledge is also a hallmark of excellent teaching. For example, excellent teachers will incorporate the history in broad ways of the 19th century if they're going to teach a unit on 19th century literature. Strand 1B for the Danielson framework deals with knowledge of students. Ineffective teachers will demonstrate little to no understanding of how students learn in terms of the neuroscience and cognitive science of how students learn, as well as developmental ways in which students learn. And they also have very little knowledge, if any, about the background knowledge that students possess, or the cultural backgrounds of students, or their home lives, or what their needs are in terms of linguistic and diversity or special needs. And they show very little, if any, interest in gaining that type of knowledge. For example, ineffective teachers will not make ways of making accommodations or differentiation of instruction for English language learners. Now, what I'm hoping for is for you to be at the developmental level when it comes to this category. So, for example, you might cite developmental theory and basics of learning theories that you've learned during your time as an undergraduate, but you may still struggle in terms of integrating that into your lesson planning in ways that I would hope that you would gain greater skill in doing as you become a veteran teacher. You might be aware of different ability levels in your class, and you make attempts at differentiated instruction, but you might still be struggling in that area. You might have a tendency to teach the whole group instead of differentiating. You might recognize that children have different needs and different interests informed by cultural and linguistic backgrounds, but you may still struggle a little bit in your differentiation. You might be aware of special needs of your students, but you might struggle in the accommodation aspect. You might still need some help. At the developmental level, there is a tendency to make lessons for the entire class without much differentiation of instruction. For example, in studying a novel set in Mexico, oftentimes teachers at the developmental level might not incorporate perspectives from Mexican American children who might be in your class, even though ideally you should be integrating that as a source of strength. Your lesson plans may make only peripheral reference to students' interests, and you know enough about IEPs to know that you really should be addressing that because, of course, that's been covered in your classwork, but you may struggle to understand the full depth of the IEP and how that's going to be implemented in terms of accommodations. Of course, the excellent teachers have addressed those areas. They're actively seeking knowledge of students' levels, and they are very much making their instruction based upon developmental level of their students, student backgrounds, linguistic diversity, special needs, and their interests, and they are constantly growing in terms of their knowledge of students, and they're using that knowledge to inform their instruction in very rich ways. 1C in the Danielson framework deals with instructional outcomes. Ineffective teachers in this area may have low expectations for the students. They may have outcomes that are not aligned with activities, learning outcome goals that are not aligned. The outcomes are stated as they may confuse how to state an outcome with how to state an activity. And the outcomes may reflect only one type of learning rather than the diverse ways in which students can learn. For ineffective teachers, the outcomes tend to be not well stated or very unclear, and they may not be suitable for many of the students in their classes. Instead, I'm hoping to see that you are at the developmental level in this area. So some of your outcomes at least should reflect upon the learning in your discipline in the English language arts. Your teaching may not demonstrate the difference between stating a learning outcome and stating activity at times, but you are showing growth in this area, and hopefully we can get you to the point where you consistently show the difference between just simply stating an activity and stating a true learning outcome. We'll work on that, for instance, with sample lessons that I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you past lessons that I've given to students that will work on that. And your outcomes may reflect several types of learning, but you may fail to make an attempt at integrating diverse ways in which students learn, the way that I would expect veteran teachers hopefully are able to do. At the developmental level, you may be effective in stating learning outcomes that are appropriate for the majority of your students, say the middle portion of your learners, if you picture a bell curve in your class, but your advanced students may be bored and some students may also be struggling. Next, 1D deals with knowledge of resources. Ineffective teachers have very little, if any, awareness of the resources that are available to them through the school or the district or other sources. The ineffective teacher will use only district provided materials that are pretty much hand given as part of a lesson without making any attempt at expanding the use of resources. I'm hoping instead that you will be at the developmental level by the time that our student teaching ends. That means you're showing basic awareness of school and district resources that are available, and you're seeking to use those resources for the expansion of your knowledge and for the expansion of student knowledge and student learning opportunities. But on the other hand, it's okay if you're still lacking in some knowledge of resources that veteran teachers would have at the developmental level, which is where I'm hoping you are. And I'm not expecting you to be at the accomplished or exemplary level yet. You are attending the workshops that you're expected to attend as part of your student teaching this semester, but you're not going above and beyond to do professional development activities that go beyond what you're required to do. You're locating materials and resources for students, but you're not pursuing outlets throughout the community and at this university or other universities and so forth. You're not going necessarily above and beyond. The exemplary teacher does, of course, go above and beyond in this area, not just in terms of school and district resources, but resources that are available in the community or at this university or other universities, professional organizations such as NCTE, or if we're talking about reading, maybe International Literacy Association. The excellent teachers have really strong relationships with universities, including this one, and they have excellent relationships across the professional community. NCTE, International Literacy Association, for example, they maintain a database, a log of resources that they can draw upon. They're practically a walking library, and they're constantly seeking professional development, and they have outstanding knowledge of how to go to resources that will enhance the learning of their students. Next, 1E deals with the design of coherent instruction. Ineffective teachers, of course, have a really poorly designed instruction. Their outcomes may not match their goals. The assessments that they're using may not match their activities, and they are very unrealistic. And their time allocation in their lesson plan is really um, very unrealistic. Ineffective teachers make poor use of materials. The materials that they do use are unengaging. Their lessons are not structured well. There's very little, if any, direct and explicit instruction of key concepts, and their learning goals don't really match their activities or their assessments. Instead, I want you to aim to be at the developmental level in this area. Now, again, I cannot stress enough for veteran teachers, even at the first year and second year, the goal would be to be accomplished or exemplary. But for student teachers, I'm okay with you being developmental. So some of the learning activities and materials may be suitable for your outcomes, and they may be even matching with what you know about neuroscience and how students learn, but you may still be struggling a little bit when it comes to differentiation. Your instructional groups do show an effort, and you're really trying to make good, solid instructional groups, but the variety is not as strong as I would hope you would get later in your career. You do have a recognizable structure to your lesson planning and to your unit planning, but the progression of activities may still need a little bit of room for improvement. Your activities are moderately challenging, but not necessarily as well structured within the zone of progressive development as I would hope, the ZPD. The difference between what a student can do independently, easily, or what a student can do with assistance. The resources are suitable and appropriate at the developmental level, but maybe lacking some variety. Your groups that you're using are kind of random and a little bit haphazard. When it comes to support of objectives and differentiation of instruction. Your lesson structure is there, and there is some recognizable structure, but there may be some unevenness. There may be a little bit of unrealistic aspects to your instruction still. Of course, excellent teachers design highly structured, well-conceived lessons in which the objectives are tied to the assessments. There's an integration of what we know about depth of knowledge, content knowledge, understanding differentiation of instruction, and the use of instructional resources in very skilled ways. I don't know if you've learned yet about universal design for learning, but one hallmark of excellent teachers oftentimes is the anticipation where students might struggle and the design of well-structured lessons so that these areas of possible struggle are not only anticipated but met, and you design avenues for students to gain optimal learning and optimal appropriate level of challenge in ways that really optimize learning. Next, let's talk about 1F, the design of student assessments. With ineffective teachers, the assessments might not match your learning goals or your learning activities that you had. The assessments might have poorly designed or an entire lack of criteria and standards. For instance, a lack of a good, useful rubric on an assessment. That you may lack the skilled use of formative assessments in your instruction. At the developmental level, you are making use of assessments, including formative assessments, but you're still learning how to assess various learning outcomes. So some learning outcomes that you're stating are adequately assessed, but others might not be, and that's an area of growth. The assessment criteria and standards are developed, and you do have rubrics, you do have standards there, but in some ways there may be room for improvement when it comes to clarity. The approach that you're using to formative assessment may still be rudimentary, but at least you are using formative assessment and you are trying to have good, solid standards that are in place. And you're at least making plans for the use of assessment to inform your instruction, but you're still learning how to do that. Of course, excellent teachers will develop diverse use of assessments that inform their instruction. They use wide-ranging formative as well as summative, as well as potentially even diagnostic assessments to assess whether learning outcomes are being met or not, why or why not, and how they can use this to inform their instruction of diverse students. As you do your journals each week, I absolutely do not expect you to have extremely long journals each week in which you're talking about each of the domains and each of the subcategories within each domain. That would be too long that you would burn yourself out. But if you focus on one particular area per journal to focus on and to reflect upon, that would make your journaling very effective and ideally tied to TPA that you're learning about in 485. So domain 2 deals with the classroom learning environment. So 2A deals with creating an environment of mutual respect and positive rapport among yourselves, between yourself and the students, and between students and each other. Ineffective teachers will have a really nasty classroom environment, oftentimes where students are insulting each other's. The teacher is insulting students in various ways, lack of respect for each other's background, a lot of sarcasm, a lot of put downs. Obviously, you don't want that. At the developmental level, which is what I'm looking for, there's a more positive environment. There's a more positive and overall appropriate rapport between you and the students, and between the students and each other. There may occasionally be some inconsistencies, just a little bit of unintentional favoritism. For instance, it's not uncommon for a teacher to, without even intending to, look at one direction of the class as opposed to another direction of the class. Maybe you accidentally get in the habit of looking to your right rather than looking to your left a little bit too much when you give your lessons, and oftentimes you don't even realize that you're doing it. You may have some room for growth when it comes to working with linguistic diversity or students with special needs or different cultural backgrounds. And that's okay. You're trying at the developmental level. You're certainly not being absolutely inappropriate, but you just simply show a little bit of room for growth. There's very little, if ever, disrespect between students and each other, or students and yourself at the developmental level, and you're making an honest attempt at being respectful. But it's not as engaging as a classroom as I would expect to see for veteran teachers at the accomplished or exemplary level in this area. Teachers who are excellent in this area, of course, you can see very warm, caring interactions between the students and each other, as well as the teacher and the students. There's a high level of respect, a high level of cultural competence, high level of competence in dealing with students with linguistic and cultural diversities, and it's a really engaging, positive environment. 2B deals with establishing a culture for learning. With ineffective teachers, hard work is not really expected or even valued by the teacher. There tends to be a lack of commitment by the teacher toward hard work and personal learning and growth. There's a lack of commitment among the students and really low expectations. This often will, of course, spill over into other areas such as poor classroom behavior. At the developmental level, which means you've got room for growth, you are trying. It's not as negative as I was just simply saying just now for ineffective, but you're still in many ways kind of going through the motions because you're still learning. And the students are kind of going through the motions because of lack of relationship with you, for one thing. And so there is an effort being made, but it's not as high as I would hope for accomplished or exemplary teachers. For excellent teachers, the classroom is both an emotional as well as cognitively vibrant place. There's a high level of learning, high level of expectations, and the students take responsibility for their own learning. And these areas really go together with 2C, which is the managing of classroom procedures. With ineffective teachers, things can really fall apart when it comes to procedures. There's very little procedure even in place, very little routine even in place. Students will oftentimes be very disruptive when they're doing things like sharpening a pencil or getting books off the school library or when papers are being passed out. And so this can really be disruptive. At the developmental level, there is a real effort being made at procedures and norms by you, but there still is some lost time occasionally. Your management of instructional groups and transitions and handling of materials is showing an effort, but it still is a little bit inconsistent, and so there is an occasional little disruption of learning that takes place. Of course, for excellent teachers, and this takes time, instructional time is maximized, there's efficient routine and efficient procedures, and the students take responsibility for these. And of course, routines feed into 2D, the managing of student behavior. With ineffective teachers, there's a lack of respect among students, and there's a lack of respect with the students toward the teacher. Oftentimes, the rules and standards are being challenged. Oftentimes, misbehavior can be highly disruptive. Student teachers or teachers at the developmental level have made an effort at establishing standards of conduct and standards of behavior, and an effort is genuinely being made to appropriately monitor a student behavior and to respond appropriately to student misbehavior, but there still is some inconsistency. Of course, excellent teachers will deal with these situations appropriately and with fairness and consistency. They take an active role in monitoring behavior, as well as they encourage students to take an active role in monitoring behavior, and students take responsibility themselves for the behavior in the classroom. They'll even take some pride in the behavior in the classroom. 2E deals with organizing the physical space in the classroom. I am going to post some supplemental material related to universal design for learning that will help you. Ineffective teachers have organized the physical space in ways that are not conducive to student learning and not conducive to moving in between rows or accessing the technology. At the developmental level, and usually the physical space, of course, has largely been arranged by the cooperating teacher, but the classroom is a safe environment. The material and the learning resources are accessible to students. Your use of the physical space is moderately effective. There still may be some room for improvement. And of course, obviously, like I'm saying, I'm not looking for this too much when I observe you, because I'm going to go in there assuming the cooperating teacher has largely taken care of the physical space. Of course, for the excellent teachers in this area, the physical space is warm, it's inviting, it's accessible, and any way in which the arrangement of technology or desks and so forth could be disruptive has been already thought about and addressed. Next, let's get into Domain 3, your actual implementation of instruction. Again, Domain 1 and Domain 3 are not the same thing, even though they're related. Domain 1 is the planning of instruction. Domain 3 deals with the actual instruction itself as it is implemented. So 3A deals with communicating with students. This deals with expectations for learning, procedures, explanation of content, as well as the way in which you use language in your communication with students. With ineffective teachers, the communication is oftentimes full of errors and mistakes, or maybe it is even inappropriate, or you're using words that are too big for the students to understand. Developmental level instruction means that you are making a genuine effort at clarity in your communication with students. and clarity of expectations of students. You're making an effort to be very purposeful in your directions to students and give explanations that are very clear. There may be some minor errors and some minor confusion that occurs every once in a while compared with veteran teachers at the more accomplished and exemplary level. At the developmental level, you may make the mistake of giving too many monologues instead of dialogues with students. There may be a lack of invitation for students to engage in intellectual, higher level DOK level engagement. Depth of knowledge for DOK. I'll give you a supplemental lesson on that that I'm going to place on Blackboard. Your spoken language is correct. However, the vocabulary may still be at a higher level developmental level or higher than what the background knowledge of your students is on occasion. Of course, with excellent teachers, the communication is very purposeful and very engaging and very clear in terms of expectations. The students know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they actually want to do it. And you keep in mind ways in which you can use vocabulary and directions to actually help students grow, and so you're avoiding those misunderstandings. Students who may understand the material and the directions better than other students will take responsibility in the classroom so that not everything is on the shoulder of the teacher. 3B deals with questioning and discussion techniques. I'll give you quite a bit of supplemental material on that I'm going to be placing on Blackboard. Ineffective teachers give low DOK level questions. There's very little opportunity for feedback, very little opportunity for growth, and oftentimes these are closed questions with single correct responses in rapid succession. Very little wait time is provided. At the developmental level, which is what I anticipate with you, the questions are planned and you're trying to make an effort to be higher level on the DOK chart, for example, cognitively. But you're still leading your students oftentimes through a single path of inquiry, and oftentimes you're asking a few too many closed questions as opposed to open-ended inquiry-based questions. You're making an attempt to frame questions purposefully, but you're not really getting the students as deeply involved as I would hope with teachers that are more at the accomplished and exemplary level in this area. There are techniques, and I'll provide you with supplemental material on these techniques that can be used toward increasing inquiry and increasing depth of knowledge through questions. So you use these strategies very skillfully if you're operating at the excellent level in order to advance high-level thinking and discourse and inquiry within your classroom. Your students themselves will oftentimes formulate questions and initiate topics, so they're taking responsibility for this process themselves, and all of the voices in your classroom are heard, not just a few very specific and limited voices in your classroom. Next, 3C deals with engaging students in their learning. With ineffective teachers, there's a lack of alignment, lack of good organization, and so things are moving along too slow, lack of engagement, lack of motivation, lack of interest, and students don't really know why they're doing something, what's being expected of them, and they really don't care about what's going on. At the developmental level, which I would expect for student teachers, you are making an effort to align your tasks and activities together through a well-structured lesson plan. And you're making a very clear effort to align your activities with learning outcomes, but there still is a little bit too much passivity among students compared to what I would expect from the accomplished or exemplary level in this area. The pacing of the lesson is structured. You're really trying, but there may not be as much engagement time as I would hope. Excellent teachers in this area have high level engagement and appropriate level of challenge for their students in well-structured, well-scaffolded lessons. I'll give you supplemental, I don't know how well you know the term scaffolding, but I'm going to give you supplemental videos on Blackboard about how to scaffold instruction, and in supplemental readings about how to scaffold instruction, because that's a really good, strong hallmark of excellent teaching in this area. 3D deals with using assessment to inform your instruction. Ineffective teachers make little or no effort to use assessment to inform their actual instruction. Their feedback that they're getting from their assessment processes, it provides very little information for their instruction, and students have very little awareness of assessment criteria, and they're not actively engaging in that assessment to help themselves learn. At the developmental level, you are very realistically trying to make an effort to address all those concerns I just talked about, but there still is a little bit too much of a sporadic nature compared to the more accomplished and exemplary teachers. You are getting feedback from students in general, but the students have an overall awareness, so they're aware of how they're being assessed, but there still is a little bit of a lack of awareness in terms of the real sense that this criteria makes in relation to their expectations. And you are trying to give questions and prompts with your assessments, but you're not really sure of how to use that to diagnose problems that might exist and how to address those problems. Exemplary teachers use assessment very effectively to inform their instruction. They're making skilled use of a variety of assessment techniques, but especially formative assessments. The students are aware of the criteria for the assessment, and this makes sense to the students, and students are using this for planning purposes to monitor, self-regulate their own learning. Students are monitoring their progress in a very meaningful way, and there's a good variety and purposeful feedback that's taking place, student to student, student to self, as well as teacher to students. The questions, the prompts, the assessments are being used in very purposeful ways to help guide instruction and inform the teacher about what is the student learning, is the student making adequate progress, why or why not, and what should I now do about that. Next, 3E deals with flexibility and responsiveness. Ineffective teachers are inflexible and not very responsive at all to student need or interests or areas where students might be struggling or in need of additional challenge. And they're not very responsive to diversity of students, for instance, linguistic diversity or special needs. There's a concept here called presence. You're present, you're aware, intensely aware of the needs and interests of your students, and you're able to make strategic adjustments to your instruction in the process of actually delivering that instruction. Donald Schoen, S-C-H-O-N, had a concept here called reflection on action and reflection in action. Reflection on action means that you're able to look back at the end of the day with your, let's say, reflection journals, and you're able to reflect on what went well, what didn't go well, and adjust your future instruction based upon that. And beginning teachers are able to do that. At the student teaching level, you're able to do that. The harder part, which comes with time in order to be real skilled at it, would be reflection in action. Reflection in action means that you're able to see areas where your students might need a little bit of help. You're able to see what's going well, what's not going well, where students might need some differentiation, and you're able to very skillfully think about, like that, You're able to think about, okay, what do I know about neuroscience? What do I know about developmental appropriate instruction? What do I know about various learning theories? What do I know about appropriate method instruction? What do I know about teaching strategies? What do I know about the content that I'm teaching? And like that, it just goes through you, and you very skillfully adjust your instruction in ways that are engaging and appropriate for your students. That's what exemplary teachers do, and it takes time to develop that. I'm expecting you to make an effort in that area. I would expect you to try to accept, let's say, personal responsibility for student success. I would expect you to would really try to not be inflexible, but at the same time, you're still growing. And so your ability to engage in what Sean was calling reflection in action would take time to develop. And so I'm expecting teachers who are at the accomplished or exemplary levels, and are more veteran teachers to be skilled in that area. But I expect you to make an effort, but with some inconsistency, because you're still growing. The excellent teachers that I was just describing are very skilled at reflection in action, and they're able to adjust their instruction appropriately based upon a high level of understanding of content, as well as instructional strategies, as well as what they know about the student learning processes, the mental aspect and emotional aspect of learning, and they're able to make adjustments to their instruction in very engaging ways like that in the middle of instruction. But that does take time. The excellent teachers are able to seize upon learning opportunities and maximize those learning opportunities, and oftentimes engaging in frankly elegant and beautiful ways. Next, Domain 4 deals with professional responsibilities. 4A deals with reflecting on your teaching, and it very much is what I was just talking about, reflection on your practice in very meaningful ways. You can see that 4A very much informs what I was just talking about in terms of adjusting your instruction in action. All of these categories really are interrelated with each other. The ineffective teacher might not know whether a lesson was effective or ineffective, and might misjudge the effectiveness of their instruction, and is not really taking into account what they might want to adjust in order to inform their instruction, either during the process of instruction or for the next day. At the developmental level, you are likely to have a generally accurate impression of whether a lesson was effective or ineffective, and whether learning outcomes were met or not. And you likely have an overall accurate impression of what you might want to improve, but your reflection in action and other forms of reflection are still growing. Excellent teachers not only have that accurate impression that you're likely to have as well, in terms of was this lesson effective or not, but they, in very in-depth ways, are able to think about, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, how can I improve based upon what I know about, on a pretty deep level, about instructional strategies and student learning processes. Excellent teachers are able to develop lessons based upon a pretty wide range of skills that they're able to apply. They've got a really well-developed toolbox, in other words, and they can anticipate with pretty high level of accuracy the likely success of the educational actions that they're going to take. 4B deals with maintaining accurate records. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on that here because obviously at the student teaching level, I'm not really looking for that, because it's very unlikely that you're maintaining very many records as a student teacher. But I will say that when you get to be your first year, second year of teaching, you may find the paperwork overwhelming at first. Ineffective teachers are disorganized and might even be losing things. At the developmental level, you would be making an effort, a very clear effort at maintaining information, having a system of organization, but at the same time, your system of organization is still in need of some improvement. Of course, excellent teachers have a very strong system of maintaining information on various topics that they need, their assignments, the student progress, and students might even be participating in things like a portfolio. 4C deals with communicating with families. That's going to be very important for you when you're a working teacher, but I would be surprised if you have much communication with families as a student teacher. Ineffective teachers have only sporadic communication with families. Oftentimes that communication is only when a student is in trouble, and so it tends to highlight the negative, of course. And oftentimes the communication may be highlighted by even culturally inappropriate communication. And when I say culturally inappropriate, oftentimes it may be an error that's even unintentional because of lack of knowledge. At the developmental level, teachers are making more of an effort, but it still has a sporadic nature to it. And it still tends to be more one way as opposed to a true dialogue taking place. And there's more of an effort to be culturally appropriate, but there are still some misunderstandings and miscommunications that may still happen based upon not fully understanding cultural norms. With excellent teachers, the communication is frequent, it is positive, as well as dealing with the problems, of course, and it is sensitive to cultural traditions. The response to families' concerns are handled with cultural sensitivity and with proactiveness and with professionalism. Teachers are engaged in a true dialogue with families and, for that matter, communities. 4D deals with participation in a professional community. Oftentimes we're talking here about a PLC, professional learning community. In this case, across the nation, professional learning communities are being strongly emphasized. Ineffective teachers in this area oftentimes have negative and even self-serving communication with their fellow faculty. They're complaining a lot. They oftentimes are very resistant. At the developmental level, which is where I would expect you as a student teacher, your relationships with your colleagues or with your cooperating teacher and your and other working teachers at your school building are overall cordial and overall positive, and you're fulfilling the duties that you're expected to do. You are participating in the school's culture in a positive way. You're adhering to the rules and expectations. That being said, you're not as proactive and you're not as big a part of the school community as I would expect for teachers that are operating at the accomplished and exemplary level on this grading scale that I'm talking about. But that's okay. You're allowed to be at the developmental level as a student teacher. Of course, teachers who are excellent in this area are often thought of as teacher leaders. They're highly proactive, they're mutually supportive. If there's a problem, they make an effort in a proactive way to address the problem in the school culture. They're basically problem solvers, and they do, in a very proactive way, make a meaningful effort at being part of the community. What you might call the PLC, the professional learning community. 4E deals with professional growth and development. This is another area where if I was your principal or if I was supervising you as a working teacher in your first, second, third year, I would put a very strong emphasis on this. But as a student teacher, your growth and development is already measured by the grades you make in your classes, and it's measured by your passing of a TPA, for instance. So I'm not really worried about you reflecting on this area in your journals. In fact, I would say that for the purpose of your journals, don't worry about 4E. Working teachers who are ineffective in this area engage in no professional development activities. They're not really trying to further their knowledge. they are resistant to feedback. At the developmental level, a teacher might participate in a professional activity or a PD activity if it's required, and they accept feedback from supervisors and colleagues as required, and they might even participate in professional organizations, especially if it's strongly promoted and required, but they're not going above and beyond. The acceptance of feedback is kind of reluctant. They don't really like it. They're not actively seeking to be part of the professional organizations. And when it comes to PD and other professional activities, they're doing what's required, but nothing more. Excellent teachers are continuously seeking out opportunities for growth, for partnerships, and they become mentors to younger developing teachers. 4F is basic showing of professionalism. The ineffective teachers exhibit traits that I would hope I do not see in any one of you. There is dishonesty in the interactions. They're either with teachers, with peers, with me, with the cooperating teacher. There's a lack of alertness to the needs of the students. There's a tendency to engage in behaviors that are inappropriate and practices that are inappropriate for the needs of the school. For instance, eating lunch while the cooperating teacher is trying to teach actually in the classroom so that students can see can see you eating lunch. I would be shocked if any of you ever do that, but I have seen it happen. Teachers might make decisions and recommendations that are very self-serving and selfish rather than selfless. And rather than being a team player. And sometimes there's lack of compliance with policies and rules. Hopefully I don't see that in any of you. The developmental level is at minimum what I would expect out of you. You're dressing appropriately, you're conducting yourself appropriately, you're talking appropriately, you're honest, you're making a genuinely attempt to serve the needs of your students. You might struggle at times, but you're at least trying. You do not knowingly contribute to anything that poorly serves the schools. If you make a mistake, it's an honest mistake. You are making your decisions and recommendations based upon a genuine effort to be professional and to be considered. Maybe you make a mistake, but you're trying and you're complying with school district regulations. You're just doing enough. You're not going above and beyond necessarily, but you are in compliance. You're not getting yourself in trouble. You're not doing anything that gets yourself into, let's say, a conference with me to deal with some sort of problem. The excellent teachers go above and beyond all that stuff, and they actually are leaders within the school.